A judge insults Karoline Leavitt in open court, and minutes later she has him in handcuffs. You won't believe what just happened. Karoline Leavitt wasn't new to pressure. She had spent years in the legal trenches, taking on some of the toughest cases in the country. But today felt different as she stepped into the courtroom of Judge Howard Gates, a man infamous for his sharp tongue and unpredictable rulings. She knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. The case at hand, a high-stakes government ethics violation that had the potential to shake up more than just a few careers. And the courtroom showdown begins. The morning air in Concord, New Hampshire was brisk, a sharp wind cutting through the grand pillars of the courthouse. Outside, reporters huddled together, their breath forming faint clouds as they murmured amongst themselves. The scent of damp stone and freshly printed legal briefs hung heavy in the air. Karoline Leavitt climbed the courthouse steps, each footstep echoing with purpose. She had been in high-stakes battles before, ones fought with words, policy, and relentless public scrutiny. But today, it wasn't just about winning an argument on national television. Today was about justice. Today was about holding the powerful accountable. As she passed through the grand wooden doors, her presence did not go unnoticed. Spectators whispered, court clerks paused, and even seasoned attorneys glanced up. They knew why she was here. The case had already sent shockwaves through political circles. At the center of it all was Charles Lawson, a wealthy real estate developer with deep political ties. He had spent years pulling the strings behind the scenes, securing lucrative government contracts while draining taxpayer funds into his own pockets. On paper, this case should have been a slam dunk. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, leaked communications, anonymous testimonies. But Karoline knew that evidence alone wouldn't be enough today. Not when the real challenge wasn't the defense team. It was the man sitting on the bench. Judge Howard Gates, the unseen enemy. Judge Howard Gates was known not for fairness, but for unpredictability. A man whose sharp tongue could slice a lawyer to shreds in mere seconds. A judge whose decisions often seemed more personal than legal. A man who, despite his history of dismissive rulings and questionable ethics, had remained untouchable. And now he was presiding over one of the most politically explosive trials of the year. As Karoline approached the plaintiff's table, she felt his cold gaze on her, but he didn't speak. Instead, he flipped through a case file at an excruciatingly slow pace, his fingers deliberate, unhurried, as if each turn of the page was meant to test her patience. The silence in the courtroom stretched, tense, suffocating. It wasn't just procedural, it was a power play. Finally, without looking up, he spoke. "Miss Leavitt," he drawled, his voice calculated, cutting. "I assume you've prepared something of substance today, or should we just skip ahead to the part where you waste my time?" A smirk flickered across the face of the defense attorney. A few chuckles rippled through the defense table. Karoline, however, remained completely still. She had been in this arena before, had faced men like him before, the type who wielded power like a weapon, who spoke in condescension as if it were law. She refused to let them rattle her. Maintaining her composure, she met his gaze. "Your Honor," she replied, her voice even, unwavering, "the evidence will speak for itself. This case is about the misuse of taxpayer dollars. My job is to ensure that the truth is heard." Judge Gates leaned back in his chair, exhaling as if he had already made up his mind. "Ah, yes, taxpayer dollars," he sighed, "because that's never been the foundation of a frivolous case before." Karoline felt her jaw tighten, but she refused to break eye contact. He wanted her off balance. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Respectfully, Your Honor," she said evenly, "I would hardly call felony corruption charges frivolous." For the first time, Judge Gates's eyes flickered with something colder. A challenge. A dare. The room held its breath. But before she could continue, he cut her off again. "Miss Leavitt," he sighed, his voice dripping with impatience, "spare me the lectures. Just get to the point. I don't have all day to entertain whatever grandstanding you have planned." A murmur spread through the gallery. This wasn't normal courtroom behavior. Judges could be firm, even harsh, but this was personal, and Karoline knew it. By the next morning, the headline was everywhere. Judge Prescott under fire for attempting to punish attorney over religious symbol. It wasn't just conservative outlets running the story. Legal scholars across the spectrum weighed in. Some called it a dangerous precedent. Others called it judicial overreach at its finest. A constitutional lawyer from Georgetown went on live television to tear Prescott's logic apart, calling it a blatant disregard for established legal precedent. Another high-profile attorney posted a Twitter thread dissecting how Karoline's actions had exposed a judicial double standard. Then came the statement Karoline had been waiting for. The Judicial Review Board announced an investigation into Judge Prescott's conduct. Karoline was sitting in her office, sipping her morning coffee, when Lauren burst in again, this time her face alight with triumph. "They caved." Karoline set her cup down. "What happened?" Lauren handed her the press release. "They're opening an official inquiry. Prescott is under review." A slow smile spread across Karoline's face. She had forced their hand, and then, as if on cue, another news alert hit. Judge Prescott issues public statement, defends decision, calls controversy unfounded. Karoline clicked on the video. Prescott stood stiffly outside the courthouse, cameras flashing around him. His expression was unreadable, his tone measured. "I have always upheld the integrity of this courtroom. The actions taken were in the interest of maintaining neutrality. However, I respect the judicial review process and will cooperate fully." Karoline almost laughed. "Neutrality? That was the best he had?" Lauren scoffed. "He's backpedaling." Karoline nodded. "This isn't going away for him." Prescott had expected quiet compliance. He had expected his authority to go unchallenged. Instead, he had ignited a firestorm. And now he had two choices: dig in and risk further humiliation, or back down before the investigation destroyed what was left of his credibility. Karoline didn't need to wait for his answer, because one thing was already clear. This was bigger than a courtroom battle. This was about every American who had ever been told to leave their beliefs at the door. And today they had seen what happened when someone refused. By the time the dust settled, the public had made its verdict clear. Americans weren't going to stand by while personal freedoms were dictated by the whims of a single judge. Karoline had done more than win a legal argument. She had set a precedent. She had sent a message. No one should have to choose between their faith and their profession. The fine against Karoline Leavitt was rescinded. Judge Prescott was found to have violated judicial ethics. The battle was far from over. But as Karoline Leavitt stood before the cameras, microphone in hand, looking into the sea of reporters waiting for her next move, Karoline smiled. This wasn't just a personal victory. This was a precedent, and she turned to the camera crew waiting for her statement. "To anyone watching, never let someone in power strip away your rights without a fight." She paused and then added, "Because sometimes one person standing their ground can change everything. If you believe in standing up for your rights, let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that matter." And that's when she knew. This wasn't just bias. This wasn't just hostility. Judge Gates wasn't protecting the law. He was protecting himself. She turned on her heel, walked back to her table, and sat down without another word. But now she had something far more powerful than an argument. She had confirmation. Judge Gates was corrupt, and she was about to prove it. The courtroom was no longer a battleground. It was a crime scene. And the man at the center of it? Judge Howard Gates. Karoline didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for permission. She simply reached into her briefcase, pulled out a small recorder, and pressed play. A voice filled the courtroom, carried by the small speaker. A voice that was low, gruff, unmistakable. "Take care of it. I don't care how. Make sure she doesn't get her hands on those ledgers." The courtroom froze. Judge Gates went rigid. The defense attorney's face went pale. The jury sat motionless, their eyes locked on the recorder as if staring at a ghost. And in that moment, every single person in that room realized the truth. Judge Gates wasn't just biased. He was covering up a crime. And now, he had been caught. Reporters in the back scrambled to take notes, their pens flying across their pages. The bailiff shifted beside the judge, his hand moving closer to his holster. Even Charles Lawson, the wealthy developer who had once looked so smug, now looked like he had seen a ghost. Judge Gates tried to speak, but no words came out. Because what was left to say? He had been exposed, his own voice betraying him, and the arrest that made history. The doors to the courtroom burst open. The sound of polished boots against marble echoed through the room. A voice rang out, strong and authoritative. "Judge Howard Gates, you are under arrest." Gasps erupted from every corner of the courtroom. Reporters fumbled for their phones. Cameras flashed. The jury gaped. And the man who had spent his career ruling from the bench now sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Two uniformed officers flanked him. One reached into his pocket. The other pulled out a set of handcuffs. "This is absurd," Gates muttered, though the fight had already drained from his voice. The officer didn't blink. "You have the right to remain silent." And for the first time in his career, Judge Howard Gates actually was. The sound of metal clicking shut was deafening. The cuffs locked around his wrists, sealing his fate. The courtroom, once his domain, now belonged to justice. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom slammed shut behind Judge Gates as the officers led him away. The sound reverberated through the chamber like a gavel striking for the last time. Final, absolute, a judgment on the judge himself. And just like that, the once feared authority of this courtroom was gone. But for Karoline Leavitt, her work wasn't finished. Karoline turned slowly, deliberately, back to the defense table. There, in the very seat where he had once looked so smug, untouchable, sat Charles Lawson. Now a man who looked like his entire world had just collapsed. His hands, once calm and poised, now gripped the table's edge, his knuckles white with pressure. His face, pale, drawn, was no longer the face of a king surveying his kingdom. Now he looked like a man who had just realized the kingdom was burning to the ground. Karoline took a slow step forward. Not a word was spoken in the courtroom, not a sound save for the faint scratching of reporters' pens, furiously documenting every second of what was happening. She leaned forward, her gaze locked onto Lawson's, unwavering, steady, the weight of truth pressing between them. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, "would you like to continue with today's proceedings, or would you prefer to discuss a plea?" The man swallowed hard. For a long moment, he just sat there, blinking, his mind racing through every possible escape route. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. The one person who could have protected him, the one man who could have controlled the courtroom in his favor, was now being fitted for an orange jumpsuit. Lawson's breath came short and shallow. He knew what was coming next. The lawsuits, the public fallout, the media firestorm that would turn his name from one of power and influence to one of disgrace. His lawyers were stone-faced beside him, silent and motionless. They had no defense left to offer him. They had built their case on a foundation of corruption, and now that foundation had crumbled beneath them. There was nothing left, nothing except one choice, and the fall of the king has coming. Finally, his lips parted, and then, in barely more than a whisper, "If I talk, I want protection." A ripple of electricity shot through the courtroom, gasps from the jury. The journalists exchanged frantic glances, their pens scribbling even faster. The bailiff, usually stoic, shifted slightly as if even he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Because this wasn't just a confession, this was a surrender. Charles Lawson, the man who had spent years pulling the strings behind closed doors, the man who had built an empire on bribes and backroom deals, was finally admitting defeat. Karoline tilted her head slightly, watching him. Then, slowly, carefully, she smiled. Not a smile of victory, not a smile of triumph, but the kind of smile that said she had always known this moment was coming. She straightened, smoothed out the sleeve of her blazer, and nodded. "Then you'd better start talking." And as the judge's seat remained empty, as the reporters scrambled to capture the biggest legal takedown of the year, as Charles Lawson's world continued to crumble around him, Karoline Leavitt took her seat once more. The courtroom was no longer just a battleground, it was a reckoning. And justice had just begun. If you believe in standing up for your rights, let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that matter.